The next piece to narratives is understanding plot. And so when we think of plot, we want to think in terms of beginning, middle, and end. Every good story has these three parts. There's the beginning part, which makes up the setting or the problem within the story that may surface. And we already looked at some of those settings earlier in the last video, but then we're introduced to some tension. And in the tension, it starts the middle of this story. It's really what moves the story along. Any good story, again, every movie that you've seen has a level of tension in it that leaves you kind of with growing suspense until it reaches a crisis or a climax. And then something happens where there's maybe a turning point then, where the crisis or climax has been resolved. And there's a level then of resolution, which then leads us to the end of the story, which is the end. The end usually in a story is not very long because you kind of know now how it's going to play out. And everything that you were feeling up to that point then kind of goes away with the end of the movie, and you leave the theater happy or sad or disturbed or whatever it may be after the end of the movie. And so every good story has these three elements: beginning, middle, and end. They have this tension that leads to crisis or climax, and then a turning point and resolution. So I want to look at a couple different passages as an example. And so we're first in this video going to look at Genesis 21, which is a passage that we haven't looked at yet in any of our videos. It's the story of Ishmael and Hagar being cast out by Sarah and Abraham. And as we even read through this, I want you to begin to think about, okay, where's the tension in the story? Where's the climax in the story? Where's the resolution? And then we'll break it apart and begin to look at it together. It says, and the child grew. This is Isaac, because now Ishmael is about 12, 13 years old. Isaac is now a few years old. And it said after that Isaac grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with a child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy, where he is. Up, lift up the boy, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up and lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And so you may have seen some of the conflict or the crisis moments in this story. And so let's look at these. And so the first verse, I would say, is the setting. And the child, Isaac, grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. There's no tension in that part of the story. It could have gone in any number of directions at that point. But we're introduced to some tension starting in verse 9, where Sarah saw the son of Hagar laughing and mocking. Paul's going to actually pick up on this in Galatians, actually. But here in the story, what we would say is that where this tension is with Sarah wanting to cast them out. And I would even say some of the tension is the meager provisions that Abraham gave them. It says in verse 14, he took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar. It may have lasted them 3 days. And so that we have some tension that's beginning to rise in this story. Well, as the story progresses, then that tension gets even more intense, and it turns into a climax, and then the turning point. So, again, you got this water being gone. Hagar's thinking that her son is going to die. They're crying out, and then it says in verse 17, and God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not." So this is the turning point in the story. This is where there is a sense of resolution. We didn't know, was he going to die there in the wilderness? Was Hagar going to die right along with him? We didn't know what was going to happen, but here in verse 17, God intervenes, and there's a turning point, and there's resolution at that point then as well. And then the following action is verse 20, and God was with a boy, and he grew up. This is the end of the story. He lived in the wilderness, became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Just imagine, though, if verses 15 through 19 weren't in this story, and just simply Sarah and Abraham sent them away and gave them provisions. And then verse 20, it just goes to verse 20. It says, and God was with a boy and he grew up. And that doesn't make a great story. But here in 15 through 19, you have this rising and crisis, climax of tension, and then the resolution with God intervening. And so that's the first example we want to look at. In the next video, I want to look at Luke 7.